Criticism of Mr. Maduro's miserable record is seldom broadcast, since the regime dominates the airwaves. Earlier this month, With Maduro, a weekly TV show, was launched. The president hosts it with Celia Flores, his wife, and an AI presenter called Cira, who merges the looks of a Miss Venezuela contestant with the soothing authority of a real newsreader. The show is probably a soft launch of his campaign for re-election in 2024. That poll is unlikely to be fair. Two international developments have played to Mr. Maduro's advantage. The first is the war in Ukraine, which had led to a global scramble for alternatives to Russian oil. Eager to boost global energy supplies, President Joe Biden's administration has reassessed its relationship with his regime and began to unwind some of Mr. Trump's sanctions. Last year, Mr. Biden twice sent envoys to meet Mr. Maduro. His administration has allowed Chevron, an American oil giant, to receive Venezuelan oil in payment for debts it is owed by PDVSA, the state oil company. Partly as a result of the easing of sanctions, the IMF expects the economy to grow by 5% this year. The second shift, which has aided Mr. Maduro, is the recent election of several left-wingers in Latin America. Mr. Petro, a former member of the M19 guerrilla group, swiftly moved to restore relations after coming to power last year. He has met Mr. Maduro several times. Armando Benedetti, the first Colombian ambassador to Venezuela in 3 years, was sent to Caracas days after Mr. Petro took office. In January, the 2,200 kilometers, 1,400-mile border between the two countries was reopened to cars after being mostly shut for 7 years. Mr. Petro has become an unofficial channel between the United States and Venezuela. On April 20th, he talked with President Joe Biden about the aims of his conference, which included the lifting of sanctions. The meeting on April 25th brought together representatives from at least 19 governments from Europe and the Americas. At the event, Jon Feiner, the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, made it clear that further sanctions could be lifted if Venezuela took steps towards restoring democracy and holding elections that are free and fair. This would involve recognizing all opposition candidates and accepting independent election observers. Mr. Feiner told reporters that the Biden administration does not want to keep sanctions on Venezuela in perpetuity. The conference also agreed that official talks between the regime and the Venezuelan opposition, held in Mexico but brokered by Norway, should restart. These have been stalled since November. Mr. Maduro's government claims that a humanitarian fund, which it agreed with the opposition would be created out of around $3.2 billion of frozen government cash, has been blocked by the United States. The truth is more complicated. There is legal wrangling over how the fund should be administered and protected from creditors. Mr. Petro has his own incentives for co-signing up to Mr. Maduro. One of his election promises last year was to bring total peace to Colombia.